There was a pretty interesting discussion about this dynamic that I've been talking to you about the reality of what Black Lives Matter movement stands for and what it does, what it accomplishes, right? Those are two things. What does it want and what has it done so far? But if you're going to talk about so far, you also have to look at what has happened in the past. We've been through all of this, right? We've had these same arguments, the same discussions. Now they've kind of combined the statue toppling, and there's the COVID anxiety, fear, and anger that's out there that's also being piled atop all of this and being used. People are frustrated because they've been lied to by their government. They keep thinking, the Democrats keep thinking, if I just listen to the government, everything will be. No, the government has been wrong about this over and over, federal level, state level, a lot of wrong. But there has been some interesting discussion of this. You have to just look for it. And here on Don Lemon's show, which is a show at CNN that I have to say, back in the day, I appeared on it a fair amount talking about terrorism, not talking really very much about politics. As soon as they found out that I was really conservative, all of a sudden the invitations to be on that show pretty much stopped. But here you have Don Lemon and Terry Crews having a conversation about BLM. And Terry Crews, I think he deserves a lot of credit. He is a black man in America who's willing to speak out on this issue, knowing that I can't even imagine. Well, maybe I can imagine it, but I certainly I'm never someone who's going to experience the kind of hatefulness that will be thrown at him from the left for being a famous black man in America who does not speak about BLM and does not view BLM the way that the left says you have to. Right? The left dictates ideological positions. They believe it is a betrayal for people of certain skin color not to hold certain political views and to be a member of a prescribed party, the Democrat Party. Right? They're open about this. This happens all the time. We see this all the time. And if you're looking for examples, why is it that a lot of historically black institutions, for example, do not elevate, revere, and celebrate Justice Clarence Thomas the way they do a lot of other members of the black community? Why? Oh, because he's a conservative. We all know this. This is long. This has been obvious for decades and decades now. But Terry Crews has opinions on this that he thinks need to be heard, and I think he's right. Let's start with the way that he thinks BLM leaders see themselves. Play clip 4.
You know, it's one of those things where I've been a part of different groups, I've been a part of different things, and you see how extremes can go far and can go wild. And then when you issue a warning, and when a warning is seen as detrimental to the movement, how can you ever have checks and balances? In the 60s and 70s, airplanes went down all the time. And the reason they found out why they did was because the pilots could never be questioned. And when you have the leaders of the Black Lives Movement who are now talking about, if we don't get our demands, we're going to burn it down. Other black people who are talking about working with other whites and other races, they're being viewed as sellouts or called Uncle Toms. You start to understand that you are now, being controlled. You're not being treated as loved. You're actually being controlled. Someone wants to control the narrative. And I viewed it as a very, very dangerous self-righteousness that was developing that really viewed themselves as better. It was almost a supremacist move.
Let me jump in,
where
Terry.
they viewed that their black lives mattered a lot more than mine.
That was incredibly astute, excellent analysis. Have you heard anyone really talking about that? And look, it did occur. We're playing it from Don Lemon's show. Monsieur Don Lemon. I don't know. It's not actually French, but it sounds like it'd be fun if it were French. Don Lemon show put it on the air. But you can tell Don Lemon's like not really happy with the way that this is going with Terry Crews, why he starts interrupting him. You always know, I've told you this, CNN anchors, all you have to do is see how much they let a certain person speak and how much they interrupt them. And that tells you what they think of that person or guest. And it's also what they're trying to tell the audience they think about that person or guest. It's true every time. I used to go on CNN. I would text friends of mine. I think I actually used to tweet this out sometimes. Oh, no, I couldn't because I was on contract at the time. But I used to text friends of mine, watch this. I'm going to get the first question. It's going to be a very pointed question to put me on defense. This is how CNN, I call it the CNN ambush. And from the anchor who's pretending to just be an anchor, just asking questions, I said, I'm going to get interrupted before I can get 15 seconds of response out to kind of throw me off a little bit, to pretend it's a clarification, but it interrupts my answer. I don't get it. And then they'll go to the Democrat. They're both Democrats. And they'll say, no, Buck, let the other person, let the Democrat speak and trash the 15 seconds of what you were trying to say. And then maybe they go to commercial. That's the way the CNN ambush usually works. And I don't care who you are, you have no way of fighting through this. It's a little bit like being on the Bill Maher show. You have no way of fighting through it because if you try to talk over or if you try to establish fair speaking time, then you're like aggressive and you're being so it's effectively it's a totally rigged game, right? Producer Mark, it'd be like saying, let's go play hockey, but you don't get to have a stick. Well, why can't you use your hands? Because you can't. That wouldn't work, right? That would be bad.
Yes, it would be bad, yeah.
Yeah, bad, exactly. So, now we have Terry Crews making the essential point of the absolutism that is at the heart of the movement, the BLM movement. You're not allowed to question. There's not a discussion about whether different policies are wise, whether this is even a focus. You know, the one thing that comes up is they'll say, well, where is the focus of the movement versus where should it be? And they'll say, no, that's not allowable. This is very similar to the way that media organizations engage in bias and propaganda. They'll say, oh, we're covering this issue now, not that issue. So, and you'll say, well, hold on. If you cover this issue, let's say Russia collusion, 100 times in 30 days, and you cover that other issue, the strong economy under Trump, 2 times in 30 days, that's a very profound decision. That decision alone is one that should be debated, discussed, and criticized where necessary. What Black Lives Matter does is say, okay, yeah, there's all this other stuff about violence in the black community that comes from gang violence and the drug war and all, and it's black on black person violence that's occurring. Yeah, that's all out there. But we're talking about this now. Cops, police violence against black. We're talking about this. And you say, yeah, well, you talk about that about 1,000 times as much as you talk about the other thing. That's a decision. That's an editorial focus decision that should be up for discussion and debate too. You have limited time, limited resources, limited energy in all things in life. So what you spend your time on, there's a reason why when I do this show, I don't come up every day and say, yeah, took the dog for a walk this morning and gonna make myself some bacon and gonna hang out and maybe we'll get to some news stories later. No, because I value your time that you give to me. And I understand that every decision I make on this show is a decision about how we are using our time together, right? Maybe we'll do another show where producer Mark and I talk about our favorite breakfast foods. But for now, we focus on things that really matter. And that's why I start at the top of the show with what I think are the most important things. Of course, this is the way the whole news business, information exchange, this is how it works. But if you try to question the decision of focus on this by the numbers, very small issue within the black community of unarmed black men killed by cops, a very specific, very uncommon, aberrant, you could even say, statistically event, and to ignore, and at the heart of this, of course, is that the life of every black American, the life of every American is precious and is deserving of dignity and rights and care and love. And that is true. But if that is the premise they are using as the core of why, and it is the premise of the core of why this police violence against black men is so abhorrent to all of us, why isn't that same premise then the cause of much greater focus on violence within minority urban, particularly in urban communities across the country? Can't get an answer. We're talking about this thing, not that thing. We're talking about A, not B. That's what they say. Here's Don Lemon not letting Terry Crews speak when Terry Crews is trying to say that Black Lives Matter isn't even really about police brutality. It's already moved on. Play clip 3.
Then start that movement with that name. But that's not what Black Lives Matter is about. It's not an all-encompassing. So if you're talking about, if someone started a movement that said, cancer matters, and then someone comes in and says, why aren't you talking about HIV? It's not the same thing. We're talking about cancer. So the Black Lives Matter movement is about police brutality and injustice in that manner, not about what's happening in black neighborhoods. There are people who are working on that issue, and if you want to start that issue, why don't you start it? Do you understand what I'm saying?
But when you look at the organization, police brutality is not the only thing they're talking about.
I know that, but I agree, but that's not what the Black Lives Matter movement is about, Terry. Black Lives Matter is about police brutality and about criminal justice. It's not about what happens in communities when it comes to crime, black on black crime. People who live near each other, black people, kill each other. Same as whites. 80-some% of white people are killed by white people. True. Because of proximity.
Very true.
It's the same thing with black people. But that happens in every single neighborhood. But that doesn't, again, I'm not saying that's not important that those kids died, but it's a different movement.
See, oh no, we're talking about this, not talking about that. That's okay. Well, let's take Mr. Lemon at his word here, and let's look at his analogy, because I think it really is instructive in ways that he's not prepared for. You know, he says if it would be like saying, I've got a society about cancer, and you're saying, why aren't you talking about heart disease? Well, isn't that very interesting? Because that's a ridiculous analogy. Because cancer kills a whole lot of people every year in America, and so does heart disease. These are both statistically very significant public health risks that take far too many of our loved ones away from us every year. You know, millions of people getting cancer diagnoses and dying, millions of people getting heart disease and dying. So these are very similar things. When you're talking about police violence against police killing of unarmed black men, and then you're talking about murders that are occurring within the black community overall, this would be like comparing deaths in terms of the numbers each year from hantavirus, which there are about 20 to 40 cases a year in the United States, obscure disease, but it's high lethality, about 30% lethality. Deaths from, which is terrible. People do die from this, right? It's serious. But if you were devoting all of your media attention, billions and billions of dollars of research to hantavirus, and spending basically no money on heart disease, people would ask questions. So the Don Lemon thing here of it would be like this and like that, no, that's a sloppy analogy. Because when you're talking about 12 to 30 people a year killed by cops when they're unarmed under suspicious, although not necessarily illegal, but under suspicious circumstances, versus 7,000 to 8,000 murders of overwhelmingly young black men, although also children and women and, you know, older people. One of these is statistically a very uncommon problem. The other is incredibly, unfortunately, tragically common. And the energy and resources and attention put on the first dwarfs from the media and from the Democrat Party the one put on the second. That's the point. And he helped us accidentally illuminate this, right? Heart disease and cancer, major problems, both need big foundations, a lot of research, a lot of dollars, right? there are other diseases. You know, occasionally you'll have these. I think I just saw this in Florida. Right, there's the brain-eating amoeba that has shown up. Horrible, but very, very, very rare. If every day we had updates on brain-eating amoeba cases, which is not to say it's not terrible for that family. I mean, it is terrifying. That's why we click on it, and that's why we see it. But if every day you were talking about the brain-eating amoebas and not talking about heart disease and not talking about cancer, people would say, is this really about public health or is it about something else? Boom. That's the point. Hey, Team Buck, thank you so much for watching The First on YouTube. If you like this video, please click that little thumbs up button so then it will log as liked. And also, if you want to see more great content from The First, please click subscribe.